So we're on the second part of filling out the unit circle. We're going to have to do a little bit of background information to really understand what's going on with the points first. So we're going to be over in the lesson. I know, so I can see both. Actually, I'm going to take a step away from the unit circle and zoom in a little bit so we can see this a little better. So we're going to talk about the points of the unit circle. And the first thing we're going to do, if you guys remember, we had a chart and we did special angles. And we learned that the sine of 30 was 1/2, the cosine of 30 was square root of 3 over 2, and the tangent of 30 was the square root of 3 over 3. So that was in a chart that we had to memorize as well. So now we're going to draw a reference triangle in quadrant 1 with an angle of 30 degrees. So whenever we draw a reference triangle, we're talking about putting that angle with the base on the x-axis. So that is a reference triangle. We're going to label the three sides of the triangle with x, y, and 1. So x would go here, because this is the x value, and really what we're saying is how does it relate to this point. So the x value is of the point is the base on the triangle, the y value of the point is the height of the triangle, and because we're on the unit circle, we have 1 for the hypotenuse. So from here, we already know that these are the numerical values. Using ratios of x, y, or 1, the sine of 30, so here's my 30 degrees, we know is opposite over hypotenuse, so that's y over 1. The cosine of 30 is x over 1. Adjacent over hypotenuse, and the tangent of 30 is y over x. So what this tells us is now we have two things that are both true for sine, cosine, and tangent of 30, and we can use that to figure out what that actual point is. So if I look here and I'm trying to find the x value, we just said that x is the cosine of 30, which is square root of 3 over 2. So both of these are equal to the square root of 30, which means the x value is the square root of 3 over 2. And we said the y value of 30 is 1/2, so we put that in the y slot. Now all of this works because of the nice hypotenuse of 1 on our unit circle, but that is the point that goes there. So if I went back over to my unit circle, I'm going to keep my colors going, that means I could put the square root of 3 over 2, 1/2 in that spot. So I'm going to go back over here. And this is the most important piece of the unit circle, I would say, is because the hypotenuse is 1 on the unit circle, the sine of any angle theta, any angle on the unit circle, the sine of it is equal to the y value. So we see that from that triangle. That wherever we are, and we'll draw angles in the quadrants too, we see that the sine is the y, and we see that the cosine of the angle is the x value. Okay. So if I move to other angles on the unit circle, and I'm actually going to draw out the full chart here, just to remind ourselves where this comes from. Here's my degrees, here's my radians, and here is sine and cosine. That's really all we need now. We actually don't need tangent. And we have the sine answers go 1/2, radical 2 over 2, radical 3 over 2, and the cosine values go radical 3 over 2, radical 2 over 2, 1 over 2. Okay, so that means if we know that any point on the unit circle is x, y, and x is cosine, and y is sine, we can look those up and plug them in. So nicely, here's my x, here's my y, and for 60, here is my x, and here is my y. So we're going to go fill those in now. So color-wise, not keep colors consistent on that page, but this is my green ones, so I'm just copying down that point. And the red ones, So there's your points. You have those 3 points, and from everything else, we can kind of figure out the other pieces. So the next question says, and I'm going to leave the unit circle up here, what point on the unit circle is intersected by an angle of 90? So if I look at 90, I see I have 0, 1. So I'm going to write that down over here. So we really can't draw a triangle with a 90-degree angle because in a right triangle, we already have one 90. So it's impossible to have two 90s. So if I try to draw this right triangle here and put another 90-degree angle, this is the one that has to be there. We can't even really draw it. It doesn't make sense. But now that we have this pattern, we actually do have sine and cosine values for 90 degrees. So because sine is y on the unit circle, the sine of 90 is 1. And because cosine is x on the unit circle, the cosine of 90 is 0. Okay? So we already did step 9, right? We labeled these points on the unit circle. And now we can go around and label the rest of the points using this idea of reference angles. So if I think about this angle over here by 30 or pi over 6, I can see symmetrically that it has the same x and y values as what I have over here for 150 or 5 pi over 6, except we know that the x value has to be negative. So I'm going to take my blue point and copy it over here. I did not mean to write that. That is a positive 1/2, right? So the y value stays positive. You don't have to write a plus sign or something. That's my mistake. And then moving to my 135. So I'm going to copy down that point because of the symmetry of the circle and put a negative on my x value. For 120, same as 60. I'm going to copy down my point and put a negative on my x value because of the fact that I'm in the second quadrant. So filling out the other quadrants is basically the same thing. I'm going to do my other two blues. So I'm copying down my radical 3 over 2 and 1 over 2, negative sign of both of them over here. And I'm copying down my radical 3 over 2, 1 over 2. X is positive, y is negative. And continuing on, and this is a little crowded because I'm trying to put them on carefully a little more using regular pencil or colored pencils there. So both of them are negative. And just y is negative. And lastly, we'll fill in the last two. So this, I'm just copying this point. Making both coordinates negative, and copying down this point, 1 over 2, radical 3 over 2, and just making the y value negative. So, kind of looks like a big mess. If you looked at it and just tried to copy the whole thing, some of my colors, well, the colors are good to kind of show the patterns, and you kind of like blend into each other. So you can go back and watch, and the next part of the video is just filling in another circle. Now, there are lots of patterns. We've talked about a bunch, but another thing you can notice is, for example, following the y values. You can see that just like we did in that first lesson, that this is the smallest, the medium size, and the biggest y, because we're going up the circle. Over here, I'm coming back down the circle. Here I go into the negatives, like a smaller negative to a bigger negative number, coming back up, bigger negative to a smaller negative, back to 0. So the same thing is true of the x's, and you're kind of going around the circle and filling out that section. So there's going to be no video for the next page because it's just practicing filling out the circle.